Hello, everybody, and welcome to Books in Hindsight. Today we have an amazing podcast for you. We have Michelle Dickinson, author of Breaking Into My Life. It's the personal story of her dealing with bipolar disorder that affected her mother. So before we get started, let me just encourage you to check out the podcast on booksinhindsight.com. You can check it out on YouTube. You can check it out on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, wherever you can listen to a quality podcast. It's there, and especially on Google Play and iTunes. So before we go any farther, let me just send a shout out and a salute to our newest Patreon sponsor, and that is Tony Calagero, also known as now Captain Seabear. Captain Seabear started as a sponsor at the lieutenant level and has upped his sponsorship to $5 a month, making him a full-fledged captain in the Hero Brigade, which is the Heinessight Elite Recon outfit. We look forward by looking back. All right, everybody, so without further ado, let's bring out Michelle Dickinson. Let's go to the phone.
Welcome to Books in Hindsight, the only podcast where hindsight is always 2020. And we explore the great books, works, and ideas of the century. Now, here's your host, teacher, and author, Matthew Hines.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Books in Hindsight. As I promised, we have the lovely Michelle Dickinson. She's standing by right now. And today we are going to be talking about Michelle's book, Breaking Into My Life. So we're going to be talking about a very serious topic today, and that is the subject of bipolar disorder. Now, we like to keep the tempo at Books in Hindsight a little bit upbeat, but we're going to be discussing something that is very serious and a very sensitive issue. So we want people out there that are listening to the podcast or watching on YouTube to please understand that there are many people that are affected by this disorder, and the best thing that you can do is to know as much as you can about it in order to help those people who not only have it, but those people who are dealing with it. All right. So, Michelle Dickinson, welcome to Books in Hindsight.
Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for being on. It's a real honor to have you on. And the book that you've written about bipolar disorder, I would imagine that's going to be a very, a very popular book among people who are dealing with the problem of bipolar disorder and diseases associated with it. So, the first thing we want to talk about is we want to talk about Michelle. Can you, without really touching on how you were affected by bipolar disorder, but just tell us a little bit about your upbringing. Where were you raised? Where did you go to school? That kind of stuff.
Sure, absolutely. So I grew up in Westfield, New Jersey, which is in Union County, New Jersey, and I went to Westfield High School, but then I also went away to a local college, and then that didn't work. So I decided to put my education on hold, and I just got right to work. And so I've been able to have 19 years in the pharmaceutical industry. I currently work for Johnson & Johnson. And when I'm not advocating for mental health and when I'm not working, I'm a potter. I teach pottery on the wheel, and then I also am a student to enhance my skills.
Wow. So is that a hobby that you developed as kind of a way to deal with this, or is this just something off to the side?
Honestly, pottery helps me feel very centered and grounded. So it's definitely a stress relieving tool for me.
Yeah. And I assume that you've been doing it for a while?
About 9 years.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, as sad as it might be, I used to do pottery myself, but you know what happened?
Oh no, what happened?
I got fired. So if you're familiar with ceramics and pottery, you might get that joke, or even or you might not. All right. So let's talk a little bit about the title of your book is Breaking Into My Life. And before you start, let me remind people that Michelle's book is available at breakingintomylife.com, which is Michelle's website. Also available at Heinessight.com, my website, and the Books in Hindsight website. So it's freely available, and I highly recommend you get out and buy it. So Michelle, why Breaking Into My Life?
Well, as anyone who has a loved one with a mental illness, you know it's very easy to get lost in caring for your loved one. And so as a child caregiver to my mom, I really didn't have a choice. So I grew up pretty much focusing on her needs and the needs of the family over my own. So when I sat down to write the book, I wasn't really sure what the title would be, but then at the conclusion of writing it, we revisited the title, and I said to myself, this is really about reclaiming my future and leaving the past in the past. So breaking into my life just seemed to be appropriate.
Okay, Michelle, I'm not trying to get into personal details about you, but you don't seem like you are that old. At what point did you decide to write the book? I mean, was it something you're out of the house now and I'm dealing with it? Or was it later on in life, maybe 10, 20 years down the road? When did you decide to write the book?
I always knew that my childhood was different, but it was my normal. I wasn't really sure I guess that what I would have to say would matter. And I always wanted, I had this idea in the back of my mind that I wanted to tell my story. But I didn't really grow up the most confident girl. And so I think it took years of self-discovery and therapy to help me realize that I had the confidence and I had a story that was worth telling and I could make a contribution with that story. So,
okay.
Yeah, so that's why I set out to write it.
Oh, and you certainly have made a contribution with your book. So let's talk a little bit about bipolar disorder for people who may not know what it is. Can you just give us maybe a brief definition of what it is?
Sure. So bipolar disorder is, and I'm not a physician, so I'm not going to give you the clinical definition. I'm going to give you my definition and my experience. So witnessing my mother's bipolar disorder, she had periods of rapid mania to deep, dark depression. So I would equate the journey with my mom as being on a roller coaster where she would have those peaks at the very top where she was, high on top of the world, on top of the roller coaster. And then she would fall down hard and fast into those deep depressions where she would just be, completely not able to function, crying, deep sadness until the point where she was hospitalized.
Okay, and at what age were you when you realized that your mother had a problem?
I think I was probably 4 or 5 years old when I realized that my mom's behavior wasn't normal because, her moods were one thing, but when her sadness was so severe that she had to leave the home, that's when I knew that this is not, what my other friends had to deal with.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about your family. Who was in the house?
So I grew up. I was adopted as a baby, and probably when I was 4 or 5, I had 2 cousins that came to live with me, and they lived with me for about 10 years. So I was raised with them as siblings. And so my mom took care of all of us. She was a full-time homemaker and really had the responsibility of looking after us, keeping us on a routine. And so, so there was the 3 of us for about that 10-year period. Then they left on their own accord, probably because of the abuse. And then I stayed. And so I was with my parents until I moved out in my early 20s.
Okay, so you became aware of this at a very early age, and it's amazing that at 4 or 5 years old you would understand what not normal behavior is, but apparently you did. So you have your cousins in the house, and eventually they leave. So did they kind of act as a buffer, or because people that have the disorder, I think that they kind of are a little bit harsh on people. So while the cousins are in the house, was there a focus on you, or was it just generally spread out towards everybody?
Yeah, my mom was abusive. I mean, there's no two ways about it. She was verbally, emotionally, and physically abusive to anyone in her path. And that doesn't exclude, any, even family members. When we would get together with extended family, she wasn't nice to them. But being in the immediate home, my mom was not nice to us, all three of us. So consistently, it wasn't like, anyone got it more than another. We all got her emotional roller coaster.
Okay. So bipolarism, I would imagine that it's not a 50-50 split. There's a depressive side and there's a manic side.
Mm-hmm.
So what would you say the percentage was that your mom had this? I mean, to each side.
Yeah. So, I mean, it varied. There's so many variables. I mean, she would be on her medication. She would think that she was fine, not needing to take her medication and pull herself off of it. That could cause her to go into depression. Life triggers could happen that could cause her to go into depression, like the loss of her mother, definitely caused her to relapse. I think if I was, I think that the mania and then the normalcy right after being in the hospital were few and far between. Largely, she dwelled in sadness to neutral. I mean, the mania was a gift. And, the peace and calm that she was after the hospital was also a gift and didn't happen enough.
Okay, so was there anything that you could tell you talked about the loss of her mother affected her?
Yeah.
Was there anything else where something might happen and you'd go, oh no, we're going to go back down again on the roller coaster?
It was her behavior day to day. So I studied her. I studied her behavior. I mean, I think I became very good at and being in tune with her. I studied her, so I knew when I started to see dishes being left behind and things not being kept, that this was the start of her going into her depression. And, and that's at that point where the silent expectation was that I pick up the slack for when my mother was starting to get depressed. So I was in tune with those little signposts along the way that she was about to be depressed again and needed my support.
Okay, so there weren't any real indicators where something might happen and you'd go, oh no, but you could see the signs along the way that she was going down. So would you change your behavior? Would you try to cheer her up when you saw this? Or
Absolutely. I mean, I write about it in my book about a time when she was crying and was completely inconsolable. And as a child, that to me was the most frustrating thing, trying to get someone to stop crying when they don't even know why they're crying. Right. So I would try really hard to make her laugh. I would distract her. I would, try to get her to do things to pull her out of it, because I truly believe that I could have an impact on her. And in some cases it worked. So when it worked, I was like, oh, look, I have the ability to have her, come out of this state that she's in. But in reality, I really never did.
And at what point I won't ask you what point, but during your, before you graduated from high school, let's say, did you understand the disease she had?
I think I learned more about it because my dad and I would spend limited time together. He always drove me to school and we would always strategize about, oh, mom doesn't seem right. Maybe we need to call the doctor. Maybe we need to get her a new medication. And, oh, did she take her medication? So, I mean, I think there was always this this kind of evaluation and strategizing that took place with my father that, I knew I knew that there were external factors and things that could be done to help her. So, I mean, I sort of knew that it was a mental disease, but I didn't really have like a comprehensive understanding.
Okay. And at the time, so let's talk about the historical context of this. We're talking about your halcyon days back in Jersey. And let's talk about, did they understand bipolar disorder at the time that you were growing up? And I'm not trying to date you or anything, but was bipolar disorder something that people are aware of when you were a child?
I think so, but in a very limited capacity. So I remember my mom having a couple different diagnoses. Like she was bipolar, then she was manic depressant, then she. So those were like the terms that were floated back and forth. And I think my father, I think as a sign of the times in terms of understanding of mental health and comprehension of, having compassion for people with a mental illness, I don't think we were nearly where we are today, for example. So like my dad, for example, did the best he could to take care of my mom. Anything in his power, he provided for the family. He took her to her appointments. He got her to the hospital when she needed. But at the same rate, it would say to her things like snap out of it, or would say to me, if you wouldn't just act out, then she wouldn't be triggered to go into a depression, or she wouldn't be triggered to get upset. So I think therein lies the reality that he didn't have a true understanding of mental illness, because people with a mental illness can't snap out of it. So.
Exactly. So, I mean, I'm sure your father meant well, but sounds like he did the two things that you don't do. He told your mom to basically, he threw everything, the responsibility for her condition on herself, and then threw it on you as well. So that can't add up to bliss in the home and your own mental well-being. So do you think that added to you feeling responsible for your mother's condition?
Yeah, I mean, when your own parent is saying that to you, I mean, you just say, oh my goodness, like I'm not being good enough. I'm not being, responsible enough. I'm not being well-behaved enough. I mean, there are all those variables that, play into your internal dialogue, to your self-worth, to your confidence, all of that.
Yeah. And I just I don't want to get too personal here, but you don't seem like the Damien type child. So I would imagine that a lot of the things that he would have said to you, I don't imagine you were out causing too much trouble, but maybe a lot of that was just out of his own frustration and looking for something, some explanation for his wife's condition. So let's talk a little bit. So we've talked about your family and everything. Let's talk a little bit about, did they offer, you were talking about medication. Was it the same kind of medication that they have today?
Oh, well, I mean, from my knowledge, being in the pharmaceutical industry and being around those who are so dedicated to brain health and brain discovery, it's super exciting to see where we are today with medications, especially around the compliance piece, because compliance was a big deal for my mom. She would start to feel better and then she would take herself off. So if you know anything about medications, that could actually cause you to go into an even deeper depression versus staying on it. So compliance is a huge issue. I don't know the exact kinds of drugs my mom was on, except for I will tell you it changed a lot. And there at times were cocktails, like an assortment that she would have to take. And back then, I think side effects were a very big challenge. And she, would remove herself from the drug if it made her feel, like a zombie, or gave her dry mouth, or caused weight gain. These were all things that really had her just say, I can do this by myself. I don't need all these side effects.
Okay. Wow. That's really something. So, and when she went off of the medication, then what happened?
Yeah, so that's when she would typically spiral downward and go into a deep depression where she couldn't get out of bed. Where she would stay there for weeks, not shower, let the house go, stay up all night long, get no sleep. She'd have bags under her eyes from crying, and at that point, she had to be hospitalized.
Wow. Okay, so can you just, for people that are listening to this, I know that you're not a doctor. I know you're not an expert. Can you give us a little bit of maybe some of the indications that somebody that we know might have this?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's great resources out there. I mean, I'm not going to try to speak to all the symptoms. Nami, the Nami site is a great site to go to really get a comprehensive list of what the warning signs are of depression. But, anything you can't actually pull yourself out of a short period of time is definitely something to be concerned about. I would definitely make sure that if you have a loved one that you think could be depressed or could be going through something, you just make your presence available to them. It's not comfortable for people to talk about mental illness, right? There's fear associated with, oh, you're going to label me. There's embarrassment. So creating a space of listening, being there, and not ignoring the problem, I think is the greatest service you can do for a loved one.
Okay, and how would you, I'm sorry, let's go back to, you said NAMI. Could you spell that?
Yeah, NAMI. It's
Okay.
the National Alliance for Mental Illness. There's chapters across the U.S. They have resources, tools, and even support groups. Especially if you have a loved one with mental illness, you definitely want to learn about that organization so you can connect with your local chapter to just get resources and just have somebody else that you could talk to who might be in the same situation you are, loving someone with a mental illness.
Okay. And if you suspect somebody has bipolar disorder, what are some of the signs that you might see?
Yeah, I mean, I can speak to my mom's experience. I think it's different. There's so many different types of diagnosis now. I think if somebody's out of the routine, if they stop eating, if they aren't sleeping, I think that just the basics are out of whack. They're not engaging in their family. They're not engaging with their friends. They're hibernating. I mean, those are some concerns. That's not an exhaustive list. I would definitely refer you back to NAMI to look at what those warning signs and symptoms are. And then also it gives you ideas for how you can kind of assert yourself in the situation.
Okay. So let's, talking about your mother's condition, she seems pretty extreme, right? So can you explain, you said that she was given medications. Were there a lot of absences from the home and things like that for treatment?
Yeah, so I think my mom had been in and out of Carrier Clinic, which is one of our hospitals here in New Jersey. I would say I want to say 5 or 6 times throughout my childhood, where she would just be completely in the hospital for 2 to 3 weeks and undergo electronic shock therapy, intense, inpatient therapy. And then, when she was stabilized, that was when she would return home. And she would be a completely different person. All of the nervousness was gone. She was completely calm. And it was those snapshots that I really loved because it was I had my mom back for a short period of time.
Okay, so what I'm trying to narrow down here is that your mother she was actually hospitalized for this. And so when people have diseases, they have they have different levels, they have different degrees.
Yeah.
And your mother sounds very almost extreme. Is that correct? Is there a more mild form? And when you were talking earlier about people that just, you really are describing depression, right? Not so much, I guess the depressive side is easier to identify than the manic side because we like to see people happy. But your mother was extreme. Are there not so extreme cases and is that still dangerous for us or for people?
No, I think, honestly, I think mental health, I think we have to get away from being afraid of it, right? There are plenty of people that have a mental illness and they manage it effectively. And that's where the support of loved ones, the proper medication, the healthy lifestyle, the activity, exercise alone is so healthy for people to do when they feel like they're going to be depressed. I think it's a collection of different things you can do, therapy, but yeah, there are perfectly functional people who have mental illness. I mean, I work with a lot of people who struggle, but they're managing it. I mean, it doesn't mean that your life is over. It just means I have this and I'm going to manage it. And I'm going to do what I can do in my power to maintain a healthy lifestyle so that I can. So, yeah.
Do you think, this is just an out there in left field question, but based on the opioid epidemic, do you feel that there are people that just say, "Oh, I'm depressed," and we live in a society that says, and I had a teacher when I was in the 10th grade that said, "Oh, our society is terrible because we think a pill's going to solve everything." Do you think that people they get sad and then they go to the doctor and say, "Oh, I'm sad," and the doctor says, "Oh, you're depressed," and then they offer medication? Do you think that might be one of the problems with the opioid crisis? Maybe like a false depression?
I mean, maybe, I don't want to speculate, but let's face it. I think when you are depressed, you're looking for anything that can help make you feel better.
Right.
So in my mother's case, her vice was food, was fast food, was chocolate, was cake, was all the things that were bad for her body. In that regard, other people might choose alcohol. Like they just want to numb the voices in their head, or they want to numb the sadness. So I think, honestly, to say, rush to a doctor and get a pill, I think what's most important is that you get to a doctor, you get assessed, you learn what's wrong, and you embrace a treatment plan, whatever that is. It could be exercise, it could be meditation, and it might be a prescription to help balance you. But the worst thing we can do is allow ourselves to self-medicate, and that's through alcohol, drugs, food. I think that's the challenge.
Right. So that's the next topic I want to get to, but I'm going to have to get into one other thing before we do that, and that is, you seem like a very intelligent person. You're very eloquent, and I would imagine that you have parents that fit the same description. Is that correct?
Well, my mom, so thank you for the nice compliment. Very sweet. My mom did not graduate from high school, and my father was in the service and went to college, and he had a very successful career at IBM for about 25 plus years. I like to say that I pulled myself up by my bootstraps. I started, working as a secretary. No education, put myself through school. But I think, personal determination is hardship can really propel you in directions if you harness it.
Right. So what I'm trying to narrow down, and I think your modesty is getting in my way. I think your mother was probably a very intelligent person. Is that correct?
Exactly. So yeah.
Also?
She was my mom was incredibly crafty. She could look at something that someone made and go to the craft store, buy everything and reproduce that. Genius, absolutely amazed at what she would create with her hands. And she was actually the inspiration for me becoming a potter, because I always admired the beautiful work that she would do. So yeah, she was very, very smart, not book smart, but she was incredibly, I guess, creative. She just would take on anything and then do it really well.
Right. And that's what I'm trying to get at, is that I just have a theory myself that I think that depression goes hand in hand with creativity. And, all artists are basically depressive people. Mm-hmm. And I don't think I'm too far away from that description, but I think that the problem lies in that if you are a very intelligent person with a certain type of intelligence, you actually are able to, if I'm writing something, I can sit there and look at all the possibilities for that paragraph, mm-hmm. and I can do it in a second. And right. So somebody like your mother who can look at something and understand how to recreate that thing, she can see so many variables so quickly, and so she has a very active mind. And so this is where I want to go with this. I want to talk about chemicals, because I think a lot of your depression has to do with chemicals in the brain that influence how you feel. So what do you think about the idea of chemicals are really responsible for this depressive nature?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's a theory, right? Or it could just be an imbalance in the brain. It could be, I know people that have parents who struggle with mental health. That's their biological, story. So I just think like, you could be predisposed for a certain disease, just like you can be predisposed for depression, and then life shows up. And how many times have we all had trials and tribulations from life experiences that just push us and really stretch us, that lead to that. So.
Okay. So are you depressed? I mean, do you follow the line?
Yeah. So I don't have a clinical diagnosis. I am in therapy. I have a wonderful therapist. I've had my own challenges in life. I think that the biggest thing that I struggle with in the wintertime in New Jersey is seasonal depression because it's so gloomy and gray, and it just really gets to me after a while. But, I haven't been diagnosed as being, having depression formally. But I do things to try to prevent my sadness from overwhelming me. Like I try really hard to exercise, try really hard to eat well, surround myself with awesome people, because those are the people who are going to lift me up when I'm not feeling so great. I talk about things when I don't feel good. Like Thanksgiving was so hard for me this year, but I talked to my friends about it and they supported me. So, I mean, I think it's being in tune with yourself and knowing, what to do, how to reach out.
Okay. So talk to us a little bit about, I don't want to get too far into it, but so Thanksgiving, your parents do you have a relationship with them?
Both of my parents have passed away.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry to hear that. So it's just, it's not a depression probably based upon what happened in your childhood. It's a depression based on the fact that your parents are gone.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, yeah, exactly. That factor, a couple of other things going on in my personal life. I mean, all these things play into it. But I tell you, reaching out to friends and family and sharing how you're feeling can be incredibly vulnerable, but can be so helpful for you not to feel alone. Because that's like what people do is they isolate themselves and think, I'll just do this by myself. And then your mind goes over time, and that's not good.
Right. I think you're right. I think that people compound the problem by isolating themselves, and then that negative talk just keeps going on because there's nothing else for them to hear. So, all right. So that's pretty interesting. What about are you involved in any kinds of groups or support groups or anything right now?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked that question. So I just recently became a moderator for an online peer-to-peer community. It's a peer-to-peer mental health community that's free. It's on 18% is the name of it, because 18% at any given rate, 18% of Americans are dealing with a mental health concern. So it's on Slack. You would just go to www.18%.org. You could log in. It's free, but that community is truly a community of people dealing with all kinds of mental health challenges. It's peer-to-peer, so if you feel like you're all alone with a diagnosis because you don't know someone else who is diagnosed with something maybe you just got diagnosed with, you can go into this peer-to-peer group, just talk to each other. Because if you hear from someone, I've been there and this is maybe what I tried that worked for me, it gives you hope. There's a lot of love, there's a lot of empathy and compassion. So I go in there myself to talk to people and get support. And I think that's the most important thing you can do is keep talking, keep the conversation going.
Okay. Yeah, I just want to jump back to this therapy that you're doing. If I was your psychiatrist or your therapist, the first thing I would tell you is to get out of Jersey. So anyway, that's probably why I'm not a psychologist. So, all right, Michelle. So give us the name. So the 18%, it's 18%.org. Now, this is for not only bipolar disorder, but for various disease?
Oh yeah, there's different groups in the community. There's one for eating disorder. There's one for depression. There's one for there's one just to hang out. There's a support group. There's all kinds of different subgroups that you can plug into for what matters for you. It's just awesome. I can't say enough about it because it's so supportive.
Okay, Michelle. So what's your role in 18%?
Yeah, sure. So I was just a consumer of it. As soon as it got launched, I was excited about it. A friend of mine created it based on a story that he had with losing his friend to a suicide. And I just got involved because I thought maybe I can be a contribution growing up the way I did. If there's someone struggling with bipolar, maybe I could help. And then I just found myself connected. And then they asked me if I wanted to be a moderator. And I said, of course. And so that's someone who can actually, jump in and provide support if someone needs it. And the crisis text line actually refers people to 18%. So I think that says a lot about its credibility. It's growing now. Now, like, it's bigger than ever. People are plugging into it. And I even have a person that I was personally listening to, a young girl I had met on that community, who I listened to, and she's now been out of the hospital for almost 8 weeks now. I think just because I've been listening to her, talking to her, supporting her, it's very fulfilling to be a contribution.
Well, that's great. And how many hours a week do you spend on that?
Not a lot. I mean, I plug into it now and then in the evening, and then I'll speak to this girl at night. So, I mean, it's not a lot. It's probably, when I'm eating breakfast, having lunch, and then in the evening when I'm watching TV. So it's not a lot. It's just staying plugged in.
Okay. Michelle, that is great. So if you are listening, we are talking to Michelle Dickinson, and the book is called Breaking Into My Life. And it is about Michelle's struggle. It's actually about her mother's struggle while she was growing up with bipolar disorder. So, Michelle, let's talk a little bit about your experience publishing. You are talking about something that is very close to home, close to your heart, and then you just decide one day, I'm going to write a book and I'm going to tell everybody what happened to me in my childhood. What was the motivation for that?
Yeah, it's kind of crazy when I think about it. I knew that I wanted to tell the story. I guess, there's so much stigma out there. There's so much fear. And I wanted to tell my story because I thought if I could help one person's load be a little bit lighter through my journey, then it would make all the difference. So I started just by, writing the story. I got myself a coach. But little did I know that I'd have to relive every single experience that I wanted the reader to truly be able to comprehend that, those really powerful moments. So it was hard. It was cathartic, but it was truly labor of love. And I'm grateful that I was able to kind of get through it. Of course, I had moments when I was stopped. I didn't want to write. I was sad. But I would take a break and then I'd come back because I knew what was at stake was helping people understand mental health. And if we could have more conversations, we'd get rid of the stigma.
Yeah, you are a real hero to come out and try to help people that have this disorder. So was there anything about the book, any particular part, and if you don't want to say so, you don't have to, but was there anything that was kind of difficult for you to write because you didn't want to relive it?
Yeah, I mean, the abusive scenes, the abusive situations where there was physical abuse, that sucked. Absolutely. I mean, that was really hard to remember, go back into that state of mind and remember what that felt like. So I think that, and obviously, I write about the loss of my mom. She passes away in the book, and I talk about what I was feeling when I lost her forever, so that was hard. Had to relive that.
Mm-hmm. So your mother had passed on before you wrote the book?
Yes.
And your father?
Yes.
Okay. So, did you have a relationship with your mother towards the end where you kind of said, "Mom, I understand now, and it's okay"?
Yeah, I mean, I think when I really started to heal was after she passed away, and I did a lot of self-discovery work, and I was able to get complete about the abuse and the resentment that I had for her. But I will say that her last birthday was probably one of the most beautiful experiences, and I write about that in the book. Just because we finally reached a place where I wasn't a stupid little girl, as she referred to me. I was like this young woman, and I felt like I was like finally on the same level with her, and we were seeing a little bit more eye to eye, so I think we reached a better place before she passed, which I'm really glad we did. But it wasn't until she was gone when I really started to understand what life was like for someone who was trying to just raise a family and navigate a mental illness. And that's where I was able to find love and compassion and go, my God, she did the best she could.
Yeah. Well, now you've brought up something that I have to ask you. She referred to you, and I know she didn't mean it, but when she refers to you as a stupid little girl, does that not give you, I mean, look at you now, you work for a major company, obviously very well educated. Did that give you some kind of, oh no, I'm going to prove that I'm not a stupid girl. I'm going to do all the smart things, and I'm going to show her how smart I am. Did you find yourself wrapped up in that?
I think it was quite the opposite. I think I believed that for a long time. I think I believed that I really was not worthy of, becoming a better person, becoming smarter. I just was like resigned that that's who I was, because they say that the way your parents speak to you becomes your internal dialogue as an adult.
Yeah.
And that really became my internal dialogue. So I had to do a lot of work to find my confidence and find my strength and belief in myself. So it wasn't out of, I'll show you. It was like, holy crap, like I'm actually worthy of something. And I had to reach that by my own therapy and self-discovery.
Okay, so describe yourself. I don't want to keep going back to your childhood because I want to talk about your publishing experience, but you keep bringing these things up. So talk about Michelle in school. Are you a good student? Are you a troublemaker? Are you like the podcast host?
I was an average student. I spent a lot of time being distracted, worrying about my mother, to be honest with you. I mean, I would sit in class and worry that she was all alone at home and is she going to be okay, which isn't normal. I struggled with my grades. I tried to be funny because I wanted kids to like me. But at the same rate, I had to keep a secret. I didn't want anyone to know what was going on at home. So I navigated. I was not a great student at all in high school.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but you had so many distractions, and I'm sure once you got out on your own and went to college, you completely turned around, right?
Sure, exactly.
Yeah, and I think that has something to do with, because we kind of share something's not. I didn't deal with bipolar disorder or anything, but I think that dealing with authority figures like in high school where you're always controlled, you don't want to be controlled. But when you're allowed to do the things that you want to do and you are interested in what you're studying, then things really turn around for you. So that's just a theory of mine. That's how it worked for me. So probably the same thing worked for you as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, so let's go back to we're publishing our book, and let's talk about, you published on the traditional route or you self-published?
No, I opted to self-publish because I wanted more control over the book, and I wanted the timing to occur sooner than later. And so my writing coach just gave me the fundamentals, the differences between the two, and I knew in my heart I wanted this to be out as quickly as possible and make the biggest impact that I could. And I didn't really want people messing with it.
Exactly. All right. So what was the reaction when the book came out?
A lot of great feedback. A lot of, oh my gosh, the Amazon reviews still blow my mind. I really wanted this book to be easily digestible and enjoyable and engaging. When I first started writing, I wasn't an author. I wasn't even an English major in college. I would tell stories, and my writing coach would be like, that's a great start. But now you need to really take the reader and show them and have them experience that story. So it was painful. Every story we rewrote 5 times. But I get it, because the feedback is, I read your book in 2 sittings. I read your book in 1 night. I was right there with you along your journey. So that proved to me she was right, and it was worth every effort.
Yeah, and how much mail do you get, and how much response do you get of people saying, thank you for writing this book?
Yeah, it's so cool. I do get a lot of emails, especially when I've done quite a few TV interviews, and so I get people reaching out to me after TV interviews. I had one colleague of mine I'd never met, 60 years old, lived in the Midwest. He got a hold of my book, and so he read my book and just emailed me, and this email was truly what touched my heart. He said to me, I'm 60 some years old. I've been with the company 20 years. I struggle with bipolar disorder, and I have a family. And for the first time, I got a glimpse into the impact my illness could be having on my loved ones. So thank you.
Yeah, exactly. Now, I looked at your book. I haven't looked around the market, because I don't think I would go any farther than your book, because your book really, it's so attractive just to look at it, and the title of it, really you can identify with breaking out of, a condition of trying to support somebody that you weren't really responsible for, but you felt responsible for. Mm-hmm. So I would definitely prefer to read your book as opposed to some medical journal or some doctor's definition of things, because you actually lived through it. And I am sure that there are thousands of people, and there will be millions of people that are out there that are going to say, because this will be out forever, or as long as we know. So people will say, yeah, thank you, Michelle Dickinson, for having the courage to come out and talk about what affected your childhood. So I thank you, just because you've helped me to understand a few things myself.
You're welcome. Thank you.
All right. So we've got just a few minutes left, Michelle. So we've basically covered your background. We've covered your relationship with your parents, and we talked about how it kind of evolved over time. Can you give us, or not us, but can you give the listeners some advice for people who are not your friends? We're going to get to that. But if you're dealing with bipolar disorder, what should I do right now?
I think, you don't know if you have bipolar disorder unless you're clinically diagnosed. So have the courage and the strength to find yourself a physician and get assessed to find out what's going on, right? And if you are caring for someone with a mental health concern, I always use the analogy of the oxygen mask on an airplane. You can't take care of anyone unless you take care of yourself. I didn't have a choice as a child. It was pushed upon me to care for my mother. If I had an adult relative dealing with a mental illness, I would absolutely want to help them to any extent I could, but I can't be there for them if I don't take care of myself. So caregivers need to really make the time to keep themselves well, whatever that looks like, whether it's a exercise, or it's a good meal, or it's something for them. They need the strength to be able to care for their loved one and not get lost in their illness.
Okay. So we're talking about bipolar disorder. How do I understand, I might just be depressed, right? And how do I understand if I have bipolar disorder? How do I even go into a doctor and say, I think I have this? What would be some things that would identify it?
Well, again, I want to refer people to the Nami website, because there's going to be a checklist there, and there's going to be signs and symptoms to self-evaluate yourself, to say, I've had 3 or more of these symptoms. Maybe I'm vulnerable for this diagnosis. And then take that information and find yourself a physician, and don't think there's anything wrong with it. A lot of times people go, I'm sad, but I'm not that sad. Well, you know what? If you are dealing with something that's preventing you from having joy in your life, that's substantial enough. Get yourself the care. You wouldn't say, oh, I twisted my ankle, I'm just going to tough it out. You'd be like, no, like, what if it doesn't heal right? I'm going to get myself to a physician. So don't be afraid to reach out and to get that assessment.
Yeah. Okay, Michelle. So what if I don't get help? I can just put it under the carpet and it'll work itself out. What if I don't get help? What are some of the dangers of that?
What are the dangers if you don't get help?
Yeah.
Let's keep it at the most fundamental level. Why would you not want to live a joyful life? It's not about like, let's see it get to the extreme. It's about, don't you want to live a joyful life? Don't you want to look outside and have like a decent outlook on life? Like, don't rob yourself of joy and think you can tough it out. I mean, fundamentally, otherwise, it could progress, and you don't want to be in a dark place where it's harder to pull yourself out of that hole than it had to be.
Mm-hmm. Yes, you probably offended the Stoic community out there, if there are any left. But yeah, that is just absolutely great advice. And you are right. People should be able to enjoy their life. And I think what we're talking about is that you let situations that happen in the past, or you have a chemical imbalance, or no matter where you are, you cannot stop thinking about things that make you sad. And I think that, again, it has a lot to do with a chemical imbalance. And in some cases, you talked in an earlier discussion, we talked about nature versus nurture and all that. So it could have a little bit to do with your upbringing. So it's very important to be aware of this stuff. Michelle, I think we are just about out of time. So I just want to go back and say Michelle's book, Breaking Into My Life, is available at breakingintomylife.com. Michelle's website, as well as I have it listed on Heinessight.com and Books in Hindsight. So, Michelle, I really appreciate you being on the podcast, and I've wanted to get you on here for a while, so it's really nice to have you on here. Is there any parting words that you'd like to say? You can plug your book. You can say whatever you like.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I've enjoyed this experience with you. Check out my website. I try really hard to do blog posts and share insightful information, and that's at www.breakingintomylife.com. And don't forget to check out 18%. If you even just need to have a conversation with someone and you're not sure if you are clinically depressed or not, it's just a great community of love and support. So that's 18%.org.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Michelle. If you are listening to this podcast, just be cognizant that it is also available on iTunes. It's available on YouTube if you want to see the video. And I've just recently been accepted to Google Play, Stitcher, and Spotify. Anything you can listen to a podcast on, we're now there. So, Michelle, I'm going to say goodbye to everybody. I hope you'll stick around for 1 second. Mm-hmm. But everybody out there who's listening, this is Books in Hindsight.
This has been Books in Hindsight with your host, Matthew Hines. Please join us for our next podcast and look for our archives on iTunes and go to thehindsight.com. That's HEINES site.com for great books by Matthew Hines and other great authors.